So you probably remember 2011, right? The Arab Spring. Revolutions were popping up everywhere, and Libya was front and center. But what if I told you that the story we all saw in the news wasn't the whole story? What if it was really just the final act of a play that started 30 years earlier?
I mean, the images were incredibly powerful. You had rebels fighting against Muammar Gaddafi's regime. It looked like a classic people's revolution, a nation just rising up against a dictator. But, was it really that simple? Well, the evidence we're digging into today suggests something else entirely. It suggests that what we all witnessed was actually the end game of a super secret, meticulously planned operation by the CIA that began 3 decades earlier. And the goal? It was always the same. Get rid of Gaddafi.
To really get what happened in 2011, we've got to hit rewind, way back. We're going to the 1980s, when the Reagan administration identified Muammar Gaddafi as one of America's greatest enemies.
And look, to understand the U.S. position here, you have to grasp just how big Gaddafi's operations were. This guy wasn't just a regional nuisance. He was a global menace. He was funding terrorist groups, running training camps, and had absolutely no problem sending his hit squads after anyone who opposed him. He called his exiled opponents stray dogs and hunted them down, even in Europe and right here in the U.S.
President Reagan, well, he didn't mince words. He famously called Gaddafi the mad dog of the Middle East. And that quote, it perfectly captured how Washington saw him. He wasn't just another tyrant. He was seen as this completely unpredictable ideological threat, basically irrational, unstable, and incredibly dangerous. So all this tension, it was bound to boil over. And it did. After a deadly nightclub bombing in Berlin was traced directly back to Libya, the United States decided enough was enough. It was time to draw a line in the sand. And things moved fast. The CIA had been listening in on Libyan communications and picked up a direct threat. Then, right before the bombing of the La Belle nightclub, they intercepted this chilling message. Tripoli will be happy when you see the headlines tomorrow. For the Reagan administration, the fuse was lit. But there was a big hurdle. A U.S. executive order specifically bans political assassinations. So how do you get around that? Well, the mission was officially framed as a military strike on terrorist facilities. But let's be real. Everyone involved knew the real goal. The key target was Gaddafi's command center, which just so happened to be inside his home. It was an assassination attempt in all but name. But it didn't work. The bombs absolutely devastated the compound. They even leveled Gaddafi's famous tent, but the man himself? He escaped without a scratch. This massive failure forced a major rethink at the CIA. The direct approach had failed. They needed a new plan. With the military option completely off the table, CIA Director William Casey pivoted to a classic agency move: covert action. You know the playbook. If you can't take out the leader yourself, find someone who can do it for you. And this was a huge strategic shift. CIA Director William Casey, who was known as a risk taker, moved away from these big, loud, high-visibility airstrikes to a model that gave them plausible deniability. The new idea was to build a paramilitary force of Libyans, a proxy army that could overthrow Gaddafi from within without the U.S. getting its hands dirty. Of course, a rebel army needs a rebel leader, someone with real military credibility who could unite Libya's fractured tribes. The problem was finding the right person. And the man they eventually found was in, well, the most unlikely of places. Enter Colonel Khalifa Haftar. He was perfect, a professional soldier who had been with Gaddafi from the very beginning. But after being captured in a disastrous war in Chad, Gaddafi completely disowned and abandoned him. So now you've got this furious, betrayed commander, the ideal candidate. The CIA made an offer: lead our army and we'll help you get your revenge. Haftar agreed. So the plan was all set. The CIA had its army and its leader. But then global politics threw a massive wrench in the works, and the entire operation was put on ice for 2 decades. And what happened in those 2 decades is just fascinating. The '88 Lockerbie bombing proved Gaddafi was still at it. Then a coup in Chad forced a dramatic CIA evacuation of Haftar's army, resettling them just down the road from CIA headquarters in Virginia. For 20 years, the CIA played the long game, just keeping their asset ready. But then, after 9/11, the unthinkable happened. Gaddafi, fearing he was next on Bush's hit list, became a U.S. ally in the war on terror. The plan to oust him seemed totally dead. But the CIA kept its asset on ice. And in 2011, when the Arab Spring swept across North Africa, The agency saw its opening. The 2-decade-old plan was suddenly back in play. As the uprising in Benghazi grew from a protest into a chaotic rebellion, the CIA needed someone they could trust to professionalize the fight, so they sent their man, Khalifa Haftar, back to Libya. He arrived to cheering crowds and was quickly installed as the commander of the rebel army, the very job he'd been recruited for 20 years earlier.
With Haftar leading on the ground and NATO controlling the skies, the noose tightened. The final moments were a masterclass in modern intelligence. NATO surveillance spotted the convoy. The CIA intercepted a satellite phone call confirming Gaddafi was in it. A Predator drone was launched, Hellfire missiles rained down, and the CIA-supported rebels moved in. And that just brings the entire 30-year operation into focus. The mission that began in the 1980s was finally complete. The men the CIA had trained to overthrow a dictator 2 decades prior returned and, with extensive U.S. support, finished the job. On the surface, it was a Libyan uprising, but the CIA's hand was guiding it from the shadows. The operation was, by its own definition, a success. Gaddafi was gone. But looking at Libya today, a country fractured by years of instability and civil war, we're left with a really difficult question. When a secret plan takes 3 decades to unfold, what is the true legacy of that success?